Hi, I'm Elizabeth Fricke. I'm the Vice President of Human Resources and Marketing here at Learning Grove. We are taping this month's podcast and to stay as relevant as we can around all these COVID issues. And we know lots of our families are having added questions and concerns as the Delta variant is really entering and thriving in our community. So we've invited Bob Welker here with us today to have a conversation about conversations with children in COVID. So Bob, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Bob Welker, as Elizabeth said, and I'm a social emotional coach and early childhood specialist for Learning Grove. I actually had the privilege of parenting small children, so I know a little bit about that, and both of my children are in their 30s now, so they did survive. But parenting was actually, I've told many people, was the hardest task that I ever undertook in my life. So, and I have spent 34 years now in early childhood, and 17 of those years I was a full-time early care and education teacher in preschool and kindergarten.
Thank you. Yes, for any of our external viewers, I don't think there's a single person at Learning Grove that doesn't absolutely love Bob Welker. Every teacher loves it when he comes to into a classroom. I used to have an office, we shared a wall in pre-COVID days, and I learned so much from Bob. Everything, when I have children, I'm gonna just try to mimic Bob Welker as much as I can. So I think you're gonna learn a lot today.
Thank you.
So Bob, our first question, as this pandemic continues well into 2021, yes, can you give us a few tips for families who are getting a lot of questions from young children about these changes in their daily lives due to COVID?
Sure. And I'll do my best because, as we're all living through something like this, most of us for the first time. So, just to remind us as adults that children rely on us and they take their cues from us as adults. We don't always have to say things. They pick up on things. They're wired like that. They're excellent at perceiving. It's called survival. And yet they're at this point terrible interpreters, just because developmentally, they're not at that place where they can, if this, then this, that reasoning hasn't totally developed. So it's just always remember that children are taking their cues from us and we're modeling. And that old saying that actions speak louder than words is still true. So, I think that is, I want adults to think about their own resilience since they need to make sure they're refueling themselves. So one of the questions I ask adults regularly that I coach around social emotional kinds of things is, how are you? So you can ask yourself that. I've asked myself that here recently. How are you, Bob? And then, is there anything you need? So those are two resilience questions. So if you're married, partnered, have a special someone, is to check in with each other. How are you? And is there anything you need? And I think that that's one of those kinds of pieces we can also model for our children around resilience. So is to ask them, how are you? And is there anything you need? And you might be surprised at what your children will say, but it is, I think I always want to think about the adult resilience because children need resilient adults in their life. So, that's one of those pieces. I think too, is to offer ourselves grace in the moment, is to take that deep breath. As things are constantly changing. So is to take that deep breath. I'm reminded you cannot breathe in the past and you cannot breathe in the future. You can only breathe in this moment. And so, I reminded myself just this morning, actually, my mind started racing on something. And, I actually was like, whoa, you're not going to go there. You're going to be in this moment. That's actually what I said to myself. And it was actually interesting. And I was like, oh, breathe, take a deep breath. And actually that centering of just taking a deep breath. And if you can take 3 It's even more magical, but it is very physiological, and it does center you. So don't forget to breathe. We sometimes do it just kind of automatically, and yet in times of stress, our breath tends to get more shallow. And so breathe in the moment. The other piece I just want to remind everyone is that, children feel our stress. So I'm thinking, when I think about, the adults, I think about families, and I think about caregivers and educators. So they feel our stress. Like I said earlier, they're wired to feel and to pick up the cues from us, and their cues from us. So, but here's the other piece that's so amazing. As they can also feel our stress, they can also feel our calm. So I would just, encourage us as much as possible to bring that calm for children, and offer that. My worry is, I think sometimes, is when adults, when we feel stressed around the pandemic and related kinds of things, is that children sometimes can internalize that maybe they've caused something, or it's about them, and we don't want children to carry that kind of feeling around. So once again, is just taking care of our own resilience.
I think that's a good point. Really looking like introspectively before we try to solve it or support a child through it, making sure that we're in a good mental place. As a good reminder to lean into your own network, talk to your partner, your parent, your aunts and uncles, whoever can kind of help you out and make sure that you're in a good mental space to be able to support your child.
Absolutely.
All right, so Governor Beshear just put in place a mask mandate for all children 2 and older in school, in any school settings. That includes childcare facilities like Learning Grove manages. Do you have any suggestions for teachers and for families to help small children work through this pretty big change to having to wear a mask more often during the day?
Yeah, I think, I think here's some of the good things that I think that, have been happening, is that most of our children are, and most of us adults have been modeling some sort of mask wearing at some point in time. So we have that going for us, all right? And so I think that especially the younger children is, my first inclination was, okay, so let's think about it just like if we were introducing to a child gloves or mittens, socks, something that they would put on that protect them from the weather, or whatever. So let's think about it in that framework of, we're introducing another, I'll say, accessory. But just like we introduce hand washing before we eat and after we toilet and those kinds of things, I think it's really to come at it from a kind of a practical kind of way, even though there is some seriousness to it. We certainly don't want to alarm children. I think too, is while we're going to be strongly encouraging that sort of thing, I think forcing something on children isn't helpful. So is thinking about that. Also, I go back to us adults, is this is a change. It's kind of a big change, okay? Especially for some of our children. It's kind of a big change in our lives, and yet at the same time, it does, and it does impact other kinds of things, but it doesn't, I pay attention to my own thinking. It doesn't impact everything. There are still routines and rituals that, it doesn't really impact. There's another step in the process with, those kinds of, with a mask and things like that. And yet at the same time, let's focus on what hasn't changed as well, and maintain that stability for children around our routines and rituals. And now we've added, just like when winter comes, we're going to add gloves or a hat probably to our wardrobe. Well, right now, and here's the other thing, I watch where my brain goes. Do I go into sort of survival brain and it's like, this always happened, or this is forever? This is a change that is very potentially temporary. It may go on for some time, and yet at the same time, it's not forever. So pay attention to your own self-talk around it as an adult, so that you can then bring a calm to young children around it. I think another thought that came to my mind was giving children some control over the mask. So this is not something we're doing to children, but if they would like to try to put it on themselves. I watched children, the piece that came to my mind, I watched children in play model or mimic cell phone use. So, which is fascinating. Some of the conversations I hear and some of the conversations and tones of voice that I hear children mimicking, or, on phones as they pretend with a block, or sometimes it might be a real cell phone. It's hysterical what they do, the frustration. I've even seen them throw cell phones down, okay? So I think this is something that, we can model for children, and we can help them in most cases. I look for most children to adjust to it quite well. But giving them some control over it. So, being able to put it on for themselves and feel big enough around that sort of thing versus adults doing to children. Some children may need help, but they might want to try first, just like putting on a pair of socks. I also was thinking about whether it was just so children can actually, part of experimenting or playing with materials. We often introduce children to, whether it's doctor kinds of visits, or things like that. We give children play materials or materials to experiment with. So even having masks that potentially that they could put on a doll, or put on an action figure, or put on a teddy bear, and that sort of thing. So those are some of those kinds of thoughts that I had around that. But is also, I just want to remind everybody that life is best learned in bearable bits. So we don't want to overwhelm ourselves or our children. So once again, bringing that calm to this piece and allowing them to, try this. And here's the piece too, I think about is, let's think about the procedure. Let's think about the practice versus this pressure to have this perfect product. So even when we have evaluators or people that, come in and look at our practice, I remember being evaluated plenty of times. And one of the things they looked at was not how perfect I was at everything, or how perfectly my children did, but was when things didn't go well, how did I respond? Like, how did I respond to it? And I think that's what we need to keep in mind as we move forward with this.
I love it when you say bearable bits. It's so easy to get overwhelmed at the thought of this is all day for at least a month. But thinking about, if we could just practice maybe while we're getting ready in the morning, putting on a mask, yes, maybe that would make the next thing a little bit easier.
Yes.
Thank you for that. All right, so for families that are getting worried, as I think we all thought last March this was going to be 2 weeks and we'd be back to normal life. Now that we're a year and a half in, for families that are really having worries about how this continued regulations around social distancing and mask wearing and really just altering our daily lives, for worries about how it's going to affect their children long term, what do you recommend? What do you have to say?
Yeah. So, and this is really probably one of the first times that I've ever thought about worry as a gift. But I think the feeling of worry lets us know that we have a need for certainty. And one of the pieces that I hope we've learned is the uncertainty of life in general, especially through a pandemic and what it has to teach us, that really things are uncertain. And even though we crave certainty, is just to acknowledge that things, that we can't always achieve certainty. So one of those pieces that I think the worry we have for families that are worried, the reason why I'm calling it a gift to us, because I have those worries too, is I think that our worry is actually giving us an opportunity for us to take a deeper look at what our children need or might need. I think that my hope is that it would cause all of us, families, as well as early care and education teachers, to actually pay more attention, not that we're not paying attention, but under the circumstances and our worries, that we would be very intentional, attuned. I call it attunement, is, we're really listening, we're really observing, we're really feeling, you know what I'm saying? And so that attunement, so that we would have that kind of increased, hopefully, that we would have increased curiosity or wonder. Okay. So the piece is too, is when I'm thinking about all of our routines, and I alluded to it earlier, is, there's going to be parts of our routine in our day that we're not going to be masked up. We're already looking at what times a day do children need to be masked up, and what times a day do they not need to be masked up according to guidelines and that sort of thing. So it's like, so those other, let's say, hours that children have, and I'm math, I'm not going to try to do the math here, but the thing is like, how can I be more intentional in my interactions? How can I, because I do have worries for some children who, sensory are not going to respond well to this mask or this covering. Automatically, when I heard this declaration or this mandate, I was like, oh, what about the children who have allergies or have a lot of congestion, and then you cover their nose and mouth? And then what about children who struggle just a little bit, because I don't always know. I mean, when we think about communication, most of how we communicate is really less about words and more about gesturing and facial expressions. So, is how am I going to be very intentional that when we are unmasked, that I really am available and I give my child or the children time. So for instance, when children are eating is a time when they are to be unmasked, obviously, so they can eat. So how am I going to be even more intentional with conversation and eye contact and all those kinds of things when we're unmasked? And then how am I going to be sensitive when we are masked? One of the things that I have been, understood about myself is how much I relied on, having this much of my face when I was talking to children. So I know I use my eyebrows more than ever. I've always used my hands, but I'm even more demonstrative. So when I'm saying something to children, I'm using my hands and I'm waving. You know what I'm saying? So how do I use gesturing and those kinds of things to really support communication? But I do think it's being sensitive to those children who, I wonder how much children use lip reading, and that sort of thing, as well as, the eye contact. So I think what I'm hoping it's going to do is that through our work together with families, that families, as well as we as educators, can be enough for children. But if there is a child that needs extra, let's use this as an opportunity, because to communicate, to express those worries. We have a lot of people in Learning Grove who are experts in child development. It's what we studied, it's what we do. So I would encourage families to access us. I would encourage teachers to share with families, even more so with our assessments and those kinds of things, is to look at those kinds of things. And if there are any children that are lagging a bit, they're not quite on target with development, let's talk about it. Because if it can be put into words, it can be talked about. And let's just, work together, as a community to make sure that our children, they don't lag behind, and that there aren't lasting effects because of this. So
that's very helpful. Thank you, Bob. Yes. I think there's not much information since we've never lived through a global pandemic before. But I think you're right, to just have those conversations are so important. And if families think something might be wrong, always come to us or come to your child care provider, whoever's with your child, and really have that conversation, because we know that early intervention is so important. for the care of children.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, Bob, I found this, as always, so great to talk to you. I miss having you as my neighbor in our pre-pandemic world, but I'm sure others enjoyed this as well. Anyone watching this, if you have more questions or you want us to bring in Bob or someone else around this topic or something similar, always feel free to let us know. Our goal is to be helpful to our community, especially in a very unprecedented time.
Absolutely.
With that, thank you, Bob. It was great chatting with you.
Thank you.